Welcome to I Had to Say It, the podcast where I talk about things that I feel need talking about, and sometimes they're not getting the attention they deserve. And your feelings, they're not under consideration.
The monster blood changed direction, still bouncing and quivering and leaving white stains on the grass like enormous round footsteps.
Joe, stop reading it. This is too scary for me.
You're right, it is too scary.
If only we could talk about Goosebumps in a way that isn't scary.
Well, guess what, nerds? There might be a podcast like that called Geesebumps.
Geesebumps?
Did you mean Goosebumps?
Maybe. Geesebumps is a comedy podcast based on the works of R.L. Stein, hosted by me, Danielle, PhD.
And me, JoJo, PhD.
And me, Jeff, regular person.
Featuring goofs, funny voices, and the occasional critical thought.
Geesebumps!
Available on Podbean and everywhere else podcasts can be found.
The podcast you are about to listen to contains at least one of the following: strong language, disturbing topics, abusive opinions, generally things that aren't appropriate for little kids or overly sensitive people. So, if any of that stuff's going to get your nose out of joint, this is your chance to turn it off. Hey everybody, so this is going to be the episode for January 8th of 2021. We're going to address a few things that are going on here in the States that need to be it may seem kind of redundant, but people keep doing the same dumb shit, so I still have a lot of similar thoughts, and just going to keep putting them out there, and hopefully it gets to the right ears at some point. But before we get into that, I just wanted to quickly do kind of a little shameless plug here. I'm going to be doing a project with some other podcasters. At least one episode I'll be involved with, probably more, depending on how it goes. It's going to be a new project called A Movie with Strangers. It's something one of the people I've met doing podcast stuff through social media, and a show I follow called The Jury Room. It was actually like the first ad I ran on any of my episodes was for his show. It's hosts a guy named Kevin. It's a really good show. The guy does really like well-researched, in-depth true crime stories and presents it in a very good way where, you know, treating the victims with the proper respect, laying out all the facts, giving you the information. It's worth a listen. If you haven't listened to it, go check it out. Again, that's The Jury Room. But anyway, I digress. The point is, we're going to be doing this thing, watching a movie with strangers. Where basically a bunch of different podcast hosts are going to be getting together and reviewing movies. And it's the episodes, as I understand it, are going to be kind of thematic. Like, the first episode, we're going to be talking about our favorite 80s movies, and there's going to be several of us, and we're all going to kind of just get together, and we each picked a movie, and we're going to get together and talk about them. And based on the group that's going to be doing this initial episode, I think it's going to be a really good time, and I hope you guys will all check it out once it's up. I will put the relevant information out there so you guys can find it. And I hope you'll all come give it a listen. And hopefully we'll be able to provide you with something else fun to follow along with. So with that being out of the way, the thing that's on my mind today is probably on the minds of a lot of the country, being America, where I live, and these things happen to affect me. If you happen to be in another country listening to this, just know I apologize for my people. This country's just been such a shit show this last couple of years, and it's not getting better necessarily. I mean, parts of it are. Things are getting better in some respects. There's a lot more acknowledgement of things that are fundamentally wrong. I mean, I think this is a great country with a lot of potential, but it's heading in a bad direction, and there's a lot of factors. There's a lot of things I could blame, and honestly, some of the things I personally believe, I don't even like putting out there sometimes because they're not necessarily the same, but similar sentiments have been echoed by fringe groups and nut jobs that I really don't want to be associated with, because there are factual things that need to be fixed, and they are taking them to ridiculous extremes. I agree that our educational system in this country is broken. The financing things, the predatory lending practices when it comes to loans to pay for higher education. We could slash our military budget by a very meager amount to refinance education in this country and pay for people to get an education. And generally, I believe in a lot of survival and meritocracy, but I also believe that there are way too many institutions that are predatory in their nature when it comes to giving things like college loans. And unfortunately, these institutions are protected and allowed to get away with this shit by the way the laws are written. The fact that you cannot put a student loan in under bankruptcy because you're in over your head and you can't live because you can't afford to keep making these loan payments. The fact that I have a friend who took a grand total of $5,000 in student loans out, who at this point in time owes over $15,000, and she's been making her payments religiously, and still owes over triple what she has borrowed to get an education. It's absolutely ridiculous, and it's shameful the way the system's set up to protect these horrible practices. And that's a whole different soapbox for another day. And we are at the point where they are finally trying to put a pin in the election stuff and deflate it and get it over with. They have just declared that the electoral votes are valid and that the winner is the winner. And do I agree with it? No, I didn't like either candidate. Everybody knows that. I don't like career politicians, period. I don't believe being a politician should be a career. I believe we need term limits. I believe we need set amounts of... It's supposed to be a public service. You're not supposed to be making ridiculous amounts of money while you're in office because you're for sale to everybody that's going to buy you. It should be a thing where you don't get a golden parachute retirement package just for being there for a few years. It should be a thing where there's no incentive to stay in those things longer than some people have been alive. It's supposed to be a service, a term of service. You go, you do your term, you go back to whatever job in the real world you had before you started doing this shit. And that's not the case, and that is a large chunk of the problem. But I've talked about that before, and that's not really what I want to focus on today either. The thing is, just to give you the Cliff Notes version of things, in the United States, a lot of people were hinging on this idea that the runoff elections in Georgia were going to decide the fate of the country and all this other crap. And people were expecting all these different political maneuvers that were going to basically invalidate the election and give the Cheeto in charge another 4 years to do things. And personally, do I believe there was voter fraud happening? Yes, I do. Do I know which side was guilty of it the most? No, I don't. Do I think both sides were involved in shady shit? Yes, I do. Not like tinfoil hat conspiracy kind of stuff, but I know for a fact I received mail-in ballots delivered to my home for people that don't live here. So, what's that tell you? And there has literally been nobody else living at this address since the house was built. It could not be some kind of typo or oversight or error. For some reason, mail-in ballots were requested for people that don't live at my address, and they showed up. And they weren't filled out, they weren't submitted, I can promise you that. They were destroyed. But it's a matter of, if it happened here, I'm sure it happened other places. I'm sure they weren't all sent to people like me who said, hey, these shouldn't be here, and there's no reason for them to be here. So, yes, I do believe some questionable shit was pulled, but I don't think that's anything new either. Questionable shit has been going on in every election in this country since probably the second one. I think the first one was kind of handled without a whole lot of public input in the founding days, but anyway, the point being, so the election's getting finalized, votes are getting counted, and anyone with a TV or a smartphone or access to any kind of social media knows that pretty much upon the announcement of the decision, shit started going sideways. There was what started as a quote-unquote protest and turned into a group of people raiding the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., and what was supposedly going to be a peaceful protest resulted in people breaking into the different offices in Congress, and all the Congress people being rushed out in a panic, and just, it was fucking ridiculous. If Congress was going to be rushed and attacked, it should have happened way before the election. That shouldn't have been the catalyst, and it should have been better organized. So the people that are trying to say this is a coup and a revolution and all that other shit, get a dictionary and learn what those words mean. This was not a coup. This was not a revolution. This was a bunch of unguided, uncoordinated morons. It's pretty much the political equivalent to a drunken frat prank. It was stupid. And it's a very polarizing thing. There's a lot of people who are out there and they're saying, oh, well, these guys are patriots and they're doing this and they're doing that. No, they're not necessarily patriots. They may think they are. They may have good intentions in their mind that they're trying to protect the country or whatever they think it is. And do I think there is way too much corruption in the inbound politicians? Yes. But I also think there's too much corruption and worthlessness in all the incumbent politicians. I think the entire system's fucked, and I think everybody knows I think that. So this is not a surprise statement. And right here, we're going to take a real quick break, running the ad, and we'll be back in a couple minutes.
Listen to the 48 Hours podcast for shocking murder cases and compelling real-life dramas from one of television's most watched true crime shows. Go behind the scenes of each episode with award-winning CBS News correspondents and producers in Postmortem, a weekly deep dive. Listen to 48 Hours wherever you get your podcasts.
I keep my social media circles kind of based on merit more than political leanings. I have a lot of people that I don't necessarily agree with on everything, but I'm mature enough to realize we can still be friends just because we don't see eye to eye on everything. If you're a decent person, if you have decent character, and we don't necessarily agree on all the small stuff, I'm still going to be your friend until you do something just heinous and give me a reason not to be. So, going through my social media feeds in the last, 36 hours, well, all year, really, if I'm going to be completely honest, but it's been particularly vocal in light of recent events in the last about day and a half. And I've seen things on both sides of the spectrums, and I've seen just so much hypocrisy and self-righteousness coming from both sides. You've got people that were crying out about what horse shit the entire summer was with riots and the looting and the burning. And I'm completely opposed to riots and looting and burning when it's destroying people's livelihoods and homes. I'm maybe a little more tolerant and leaning if you're rioting, looting, and burning down the people you're actually mad at. I may be a little more forgiving if you are actually being productive with your destruction. But that wasn't the case for the most part. Looting a Target does not make you a patriot or a civil rights marcher or anything else. It makes you an opportunistic piece of crap. And you're not out there trying to make change. You're out there trying to make a come up, and fuck you. But on the other side of that coin, the people that were very vocal and the ones that right now with what's going on that are really just rubbing me wrong, and I'm not saying it's an invalid point that they're trying to raise, but they're doing it in such a shit way. And I've seen a lot of people, in particular the really hard left-leaning self-proclaimed social justice warriors that have all the current trendy political hashtags and things stuffed into their online personas, whether it's in their bios or their Twitter handles or their however they're self-identifying as. Look at me, I'm so damn self-righteous. And here's where I take issue. It's perfectly okay to point out that the reactions from the authority figures in these cases are being handled completely different in relation to certain things, like saying how there was not nearly as much of a pushback response as there were against the other issues. That's not entirely inaccurate. The Black Lives Matter marches, the actual protests that were for the most part handled in a decent way, that were not looting and rioting and burning shit to the ground and destroying people's lives. Those were the ones that really stayed peaceful and didn't cause too much trouble. They weren't necessarily handled the same. There was definitely more of a police presence. But when things started getting pushed back, they were definitely handled with way more force than what was seen yesterday. But it's a double-edged thing. Yes, it highlights a very big inequity that still needs to be addressed. By the same coin, though, you can't keep constantly crying out about police brutality and about how all these cops... If you put all cops are bastards on something, and then you start complaining when they're not showing enough force in your opinion because of who they're reacting with, it's kind of you can't have it both ways. You can't say there's too much police violence and then bitch that there's not enough police violence because now they're going after somebody you don't like. If you want to point out the inequalities and how police violence is being applied unfairly, that's fine. That's a valid point. Saying you cops are bastards because you're not being violent enough now because it's against somebody I don't like is hypocrisy. You either want police to be violent, but you want it to be violence across the board, or you want the cops to cut the shit. You can't have it both ways. And I'm not an all cops are bastards person. I know cops personally. I have friends that are police officers. There are good ones out there. They're not all shitheads. They're not all assholes. There needs to be more accountability. The structure needs to be redone so cops are not afraid to come out when they see something wrong and do something about it. There's a whole culture there that needs to be addressed, and it's entirely possible. There are plenty of good cops out there. They don't get the coverage. They don't get the press because the bad ones sell ratings. The good ones are out there doing their job and actually making an impact in people's lives in a positive way, and they don't get any attention for it. It's so much easier to find videos of cops doing terrible shit than it is to find videos of them doing good stuff. Because when they do good things and when they do things for people, people don't see it. They don't acknowledge it. Now, am I saying they're all great? No. Am I saying that the system is fine and needs to be left alone? Fuck no. What I am saying is, if you really want to be righteous and you want to be a good person and have good guidance, you have to be fair. You have to be truthful. You have to look at things across the board, not just the parts you want to focus on. If you can't start taking things in and judging things and viewing things as a whole, you're no better than the people you're bitching about. And that's really where I'm getting hung up on. People are still, after all this time and all this shit going on, things that should be opening people's eyes to the way the world actually works. And instead, they're just getting more firmly entrenched in this, our way is right, and fuck you if you don't agree with me. And it's never going to work. I keep saying this, and I know the people that probably listen on anything resembling a regular basis probably agree with me that there needs to be compromise. There needs to be a change. It needs to be an adult way of handling things instead of this, I'm right and la, la, la. If you don't like it, I'm going to stick my fingers in my ears and keep on screaming and yelling because I don't want to hear what you have to say. I'm right, you're wrong. My opinion's the only one that's valid. And that shit doesn't work. Nobody will agree to that because you're doing the exact same thing to the other side. if we want to make any progress, if we want to get this world back on the track, if we want to get things in a better way, stop buying into the bullshit. Stop saying, I have to be 100% right. That's not a mature way of dealing with things. That's not an adult way of dealing with things. That doesn't make you somehow perfect. That makes you pompous. That makes you an ass. You have to learn to compromise. That is how grown-ups deal with situations. We have an entire generation of old-ass kids because they never learned to deal with things like an adult. And the problem is, the powers that be, they make a good show of trying to act like they care, like trying to act like they're doing something about it. But the reality of the matter is, it's all it is an act. There's a lot of hair rending and chest beating, but at the end of the day, the statements from the politicians and the quote-unquote leadership of all these different movements and everything is, you're an asshole, you have to agree with us. Our way is right, and if you don't see it, you're a bastard. It's not, we need to come together, we need to talk, we need to discuss, we need to develop, we need to make progress. It's, we're right, and if you don't like it, you're an asshole. And the problem is, there's nothing that is going to make somebody embrace you by telling them what a piece of shit they are. You don't like it when it's done to you, they don't like it when it's done to them. It's a two-way street. We've lost all respect, and it seems like nobody wants to acknowledge the fact that these people that benefit from this division, that they are in power, and they are there because of this shit. They whip it into a frenzy, and then they throw it to the ground and say, well, we're not going to compromise, but it's the other side's fault. If you're not willing to compromise, that's on you. That's not on the other people because, they're not willing to give in to us. You're not willing to give any, and neither are they. You are the same. You're on opposite sides of an issue, but you are exactly the same when it comes to temperament and personality, and people need to understand that. I don't know why it is such a hard thing to get through people's heads. And there's this whole echo chamber thing going on where when you only surround yourself with people that agree with you and that feel and think the same way you do, you get so amped up and so convinced of your righteousness that you don't realize it's only the group you are surrounded by. It's a complete disconnect. It needs to be addressed. It needs to be fixed. This shit can't keep happening. And we've got all these people on, like I said, on all the various aspects of social media and all the other things that are floating around and all the stuff that's getting super amplified because of the lockdowns and the pandemic and all this other shit. And it's become such a huge factor that echo chamber effect has been put into place and just amplified exponentially, where it's getting to the point where we're going to reach a breaking point. Things are going to happen, and people are talking about, revolutions and civil wars. And that's not what it's going to be. I mean, there will be dust-ups. There will be little hotspot skirmishes. There is not enough actual leadership. There's a lot of people out there stirring up shit, but that's not the same thing as a leader. And there's a lot of people trying to be the boss, but a boss and a leader aren't the same thing. Anybody that's had a shitty boss knows the difference between a boss and a leader. There's a huge difference between somebody that's going to tell you what to do and somebody that's going to roll their sleeves up and work alongside you. And there are no there's no real leadership left for the good, for the bad, for any of it. It's a bunch of little tiny pushy assholes going, believe what I believe, do what I say, and things will get better. And the problem is all these dumb sons of bitches buying into it. We need to be better. We need to do better. Compassion, understanding, these are not things that are being applied, and they are the things that are going to fix these problems. So realistically, we need to get out there and embrace these things and encourage these things. If you're, in roughly my age bracket and you're a parent and you've got kids, teach them better. Teach them to be better. Teach them to be open-minded. It's not that hard. We need to. That's one of my beefs with the educational system. They don't teach you how to think critically anymore. They teach you how to pass tests. That's really when shit started going downhill, is when people lost the capacity for critical thinking. They echo back what they're told to echo back so they can get the good grade and they can move on. But they don't know why they're saying what they say. They just know that's the right answer. And that's the mentality we need to change. Encourage critical thinking. Encourage acceptance. Encourage forgiveness. Encourage love. These are not things that are mutually exclusive. You know, we need to be better. We need to do better. We need to get our shit together. We need to grow up. And for now, that's what I had to say. Thanks for listening to another episode of I Had to Say It. If you liked what you heard, leave a review, give us a follow, give me some feedback. And if you didn't like what you heard, leave a review, give me a follow, give me some feedback. I'll try and fix it. Check us out on all the social media platforms. At I Had to Say It podcast is the trigger for all that stuff, for the search term. And if you want, check out the website, www.ihadtosayitpodcast.com. There's links to people that have been involved with the program, things I've talked about. There are some links available for some merch that we're working on, and there are ways to contact us there as well. And thanks for listening, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.